questions.
Have you been in touch with anyone in Cuba? And what's your...
Well, the authorities in Cuba, the border guard has constant contact with the Coast Guard, so they alerted them this morning. I was made aware of it at that time. Oftentimes in these incidents and things like this, the initial reports are incomplete. And then as the day has progressed, I think early this morning, certainly by 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. this time, maybe a little later our time here, I reached out and we began to look at it independently. We have various different elements of the U.S. government that are trying to verify elements of the story based on what's been provided to us now. I know that the Coast Guard has responded to the area, to the vicinity. I'll need to get more fidelity and understanding from them once I get on the airplane about what exactly they're looking for. I don't know who has possession of the vessel, which is the first thing we'd want to have. We obviously want to have access to these people if they are American citizens or U.S. residents. But I'm not going to speculate now because right now still a lot of the information that's out there is information that's been provided by the Cubans. We are going to verify that information independently and reach our own conclusions.
If you've seen the recent Senate hearing, you already know it was a tense and revealing moment. Lawmakers were examining the situation surrounding the deadly strike on a U.S. civilian boat and the broader implications for U.S.-Cuba relations. During the exchange, Marco Rubio asked a question that has since gone viral. What kind of retaliation might we expect? That moment quickly became the headline, but there's a lot more context behind it. Before we dive in, make sure you like and subscribe to 45th Perspective, and if you want to support the channel directly, you can join us at patreon.com/45th Perspective. Every bit of support helps us keep producing thoughtful, independent analysis. So let's break down what actually happened, why Rubio asked what he did, and what the different sides are saying about the situation. The hearing itself brought together national security officials to explain how the U.S. plans to respond to the strike attributed to Cuba, and whether this represents a one-off escalation or part of a larger strategic pattern. The officials discussed the intel they could share publicly, the legal framework for any U.S. response, and where diplomacy fits into all of this. A lot of it was a mix of caution, reassurance, and ambiguity, typical of these high-profile hearings where classified details sit right behind the closed door the public doesn't get to peek through. When Rubio pressed his question, he was tapping into a concern many Americans have. Is this situation about to spiral? His line of questioning reflected frustration that the U.S. sometimes appears hesitant or overly restrained, especially when an attack results in American casualties. From his perspective, the U.S. needs to set a clear precedent that targeting Americans, whether military or civilian, has consequences. He framed the issue as one of deterrence. If the response is too soft, what message does that send? But other senators and witnesses approached it differently. Some emphasized that retaliation, especially military retaliation, isn't just about strength, it's about strategy. They warned that moving too fast can escalate tensions unnecessarily, painting the U.S. into a corner. They pointed out the importance of verifying intelligence, understanding Cuba's intent, and avoiding steps that would risk miscalculation in an already complicated regional environment. And, of course, they raised concerns about how any response would affect ordinary Cuban citizens, many of whom have no influence over the government's decisions. It's worth remembering that the political context here is layered. The U.S. Senate has been sharply divided over how to approach Cuba for decades. Some lawmakers push for hardline policies, arguing that the regime only responds to pressure. Others say engagement and diplomacy are more effective, and that isolating Cuba tends to entrench the government rather than weaken it. This hearing became a stage where those long-standing arguments played out once again, but with the added urgency of a deadly incident that demanded a public explanation. One thing that stood out to me is how different the priorities are between elected officials and the security experts testifying. Senators understandably focus on accountability and optics, what the American people see, how strong or weak the country looks, and how the administration's approach can be judged in political terms. The national security officials, on the other hand, focused on timelines, intelligence gaps, and avoiding unintended consequences. You could feel the tension between the need for transparency and the limits of what they could say publicly. So what does all this mean for everyday Americans? First, it's a reminder that foreign policy decisions rarely have clean, satisfying answers. Even when an attack is clear-cut and tragic, the path forward isn't always obvious. Retaliation can deter future attacks, but it can also spark escalation. Diplomacy can prevent further conflict, but it can also be spun politically as weakness. Regular people are often left caught between these narratives, trying to figure out what's real and what's rhetoric. Second, this incident highlights how interconnected global politics are. A single strike in the Caribbean can turn into a major national debate in Washington, with real consequences for international relationships, trade, immigration, and military operations. Whether you lean toward a stronger response or a more cautious one, it's important to understand that every action has ripple effects. And finally, the hearing sharpened the question of what the U.S. wants its role in the region to be. Is the priority deterrence, stability, democracy promotion, or simply preventing further violence? Depending on which witness or senator you listened to, the answer shifted slightly. And honestly, part of having a healthy democracy is acknowledging that smart people can disagree about strategy while still sharing the same ultimate goal: keeping Americans safe. My own take? I think Rubio's question, while dramatic, reflects a real concern. If the U.S. signals uncertainty or hesitation after an attack, that could invite more risk down the line. At the same time, retaliation for retaliation's sake isn't strategy. It's reaction. The best path forward considers proportionality, long-term consequences, and the very real human impact of any escalation. It's not about being hawkish or dovish, it's about being smart. The hearing didn't give us all the answers, but it did show us the complexity officials are wrestling with. And that's why discussions like this matter. These issues aren't abstract. They affect global stability, military readiness, and even how U.S. citizens abroad are perceived and protected. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Keep it respectful, keep it thoughtful, and share your perspective in the comments.
So this was not U.S. government personnel, there was no U.S. government
No.
operation happening?
No.
Have you spoken to any Cuban officials about this?
No, we haven't spoken directly about this now. No, I'm not going to comment about any conversations we've had on this topic. Suffice it to say, what it's important to be out there and everyone needs to know is that we're going to have our own information on this, and we're going to figure out exactly what happened. And there are a number of things that could have happened here. But I'm not even going to, I was about to say, I'm not even going to speculate as to what it could have been. It's a wide range of things. But suffice it to say, it is highly unusual to see shootouts in open sea like that. It's not something that happens every day. It's something, frankly, that hasn't happened with Cuba in a very long time. But we're going to find out. We're not going to base our conclusions on what they've told us. And I'm very, very confident that we will know the full story of what happened here, and we will know it soon. And then, we'll respond appropriately based on what that information tells us.
If these were American citizens or residents, what kind of retaliation might we expect?
Yeah, I'm not going to speculate on what the U.S. will do. What I'm telling you is that we're going to find out exactly what happened and who was involved, and then we'll make a determination on the basis of what we find out. And we are going to find out. But we're not going to just take what somebody else tells us. We're going to find out, and I'm very confident we will be able to know the story and be able to independently verify facts about it.
Just to clarify, you found out prior to the post on X?
Yes. Well, and obviously there was an incident at sea, so we do have constant contact with them at the Coast Guard level, where they notify the U.S. Coast Guard on a variety of things, including migrants and so forth. There's these mill-to-mill, I guess, Coast Guard to Coast Guard channels that exist, and this reporting early on was fragmentary about an incident, but not the details. They provided more details in the social media post they put out, as well as a notice they sent to the embassy, or from their embassy to the State Department. But in it is embedded all sorts of facts, or things that they claim to be facts, such as where the ship came from, where the boat came from, who was on it, what happened, and so forth. These are the things we're going to independently verify, and then, we'll present that to the policymakers in our country, including the president, and we'll make determinations based on the facts. Right now, we're still gathering facts.
Do you have any reason to doubt their version, or is it just your?
I have every reason to want our own information. Like, we don't generally make decisions in the United States on the basis of what the Cuban authorities are saying.
You guys with the oil and that statistic in the Treasury Department about Venezuela and Cuba, that for humanitarian reasons for private companies. Is this a shift in policy? What is the motivation?
No, it's always been legal to sell to the private sector in Cuba. Okay, these would not be sales to the government. These would not be sales to the military-owned Gaesa, the company. These would be sales to a very small private sector that exists in Cuba. And that's always been legal. I mean, there are people that have a license to do that now. This would just expand to the numbers that could do it. Again, it would go to the private sector. The private sector in Cuba is quite small. It exists, but it's small. And it certainly, in and of itself, does not have the capacity to deal with the scale and scope of the challenges they're facing. But if the Cuban economy were a functioning economy, it would have a much larger private sector. And so what's clear is that, and I would say this, that the people of Cuba are suffering today. They've been suffering for a long time. They're suffering now, perhaps more than at any time in recent memory, perhaps in the history, since 1959. This is the worst economic climate that Cuba has faced. And it is the authorities there in that government who are responsible for that. They're the ones that have made decisions that have left Cuba vulnerable to the situation they're now in. Understand that Cuba has largely survived on the basis of subsidies. The Soviet Union gave them free things. When the Soviet Union collapsed, they went into a special period, which was disastrous for them. And then along came Hugo Chavez and bailed them out for a long time. When that sort of died off a little bit, the Maduro regime was providing them fuel, or they were providing them actually crude oil. Some percentage of that was refined and used domestically, and a large percentage of that was never even made it to Cuba. It was sold in the open market for cash to fund the regime and to fund the military-owned company. So the reason why Cuba's electricity grid was already in collapse, before Maduro was captured, it was already in collapse. The reason why things are as bad as they are is because they have an economic model that does not exist, that does not work, doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It is not functional. And the only way Cuba's going to have a better future is if it has a different economic model. Now, if you go back to President Trump's 2017 or 2018 executive orders on a new policy in Cuba, that policy was entirely designed in many ways to put the private sector and individual private Cubans, not affiliated with the government, not affiliated with the military, in a privileged position. The reason why those industries have not flourished in Cuba is because the regime has not allowed them to flourish. So now that they're in a crisis, there's an opportunity for them to import fuel in small quantities, granted, through a private sector. If we catch the private sector there playing games and diverting it to the regime or to the military company, if we find that they're moving that stuff around in ways that violate the spirit and the scope of these permissions, those licenses will be canceled. But it's the same reason why we provided humanitarian assistance. We provided humanitarian assistance in Cuba in the aftermath of the hurricane. We provided it through the Catholic Church, not through the government. We're prepared to do something similar when it comes to fuel through the private sector, the small private sector. But that alone will not solve Cuba's very dramatic problems that have been caused by 60 some odd years of mismanagement, ineptitude, and a failed economic model.
There's been some reporting that this was a boat, a private boat, that was trying to help some people escape Cuba. I don't know if you can comment on that, and if you can say whether you would advise people to not do that. What can you say about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not going to comment about this specific boat until we have all the information. So I just want to be clear. I'm not going to speculate about whose boat it was, what they were doing, why they were there, what actually happened. I'm not going to speculate on that because it's not smart to do that until we have all the facts. Now, separate from that, yes, there have been people in the past that have run into Cuba to bring people and so on. It is illegal. It is a violation of federal law to go and run people back and forth. And we've caught people doing that in the past. It doesn't normally lead to shootouts, to be honest with you. But I'm not claiming that's what's happened here. I don't know, we don't know. And it would be unfair for me and unwise to sit here and speculate. It might be this and it might be that when we're going to know. We are going to know. And when we know, then we'll tell you and we'll do what needs to be done about it, depending on what it is.